I'm happy to move the Local Government Rates and Miscellaneous Provisions Bill 2014 and to say that we now live in a country, Minister, that the government is at war with its citizens. It continues to reflect on the various problems that are being faced by people in society, the issues that they have. We talk about them here in the House, but there's very little action. Out of austerity has come the need to review all of the old certainties, review all of the certainties of income that the government would have, and question ourselves here as to where that income comes from, particularly when we're talking about businesses and entrepreneurs, because the economy in the past, with its entrepreneurial spirit, created 800,000 jobs and leading on into 1 million if you were to take the various sectors into consideration. Apart from the job creation that arises from that, there is the life in a local community, there is the sustainability of jobs in the various villages and towns around the country, and there is, I suppose, an enjoyment in rural Ireland as well as urban Ireland that we are together in progressing in this country. But what has happened now is there is a serious imbalance in what's going on. And on one side you have the various rates and taxes being levied against those that are in business, and you have the rhetoric around the whole notion that we are supportive of business, when in fact businesses of a small nature, particularly family businesses, they get very little support from government. In fact, the layers of bureaucracy that are placed on the shoulders of those families and those individuals that are entrepreneurs, that are keeping local villages and towns alive, is enormous. And you don't recognise it. At least you don't recognise it in government. I know that in opposition you raise the issues in terms of upward-only rent reviews. You raise the issue in relation to the rates burden itself. And yet in government there is a reluctance to do anything. Don't tell me that it is impossible through legislation to deal with the upward-only rent reviews. It is, of course, possible, and the Quinn legislation should be built upon. It should be enhanced and it should be enforced, and we should give breathing space to those that are caught in that cycle of upward-only rents. And in a similar way, you need to examine the rates structure. You need to examine the fact that 28% of a local authority's income comes from rates, and the fact that 1.4 billion, I think it is collected in rates and spent every year. And the question has to be asked, how well is that money spent? What sort of value do people get for that money? Do local communities get for that money? Is there real value for money? Or is this just another way of collecting taxes? And I suggest to you, Minister, that it is another way of collecting taxes from the very same tax base that is paying a significant amount of tax in terms of enterprise and employment. And that is not the way it should be. The future in this country is around entrepreneurs. It is around those in local communities creating jobs that are sustainable. And the one single big issue that people will tell you about in your clinics, and you know this, is the fact that having adjusted every other cost within their business, the one single cost that they cannot deal with in terms of a reduction is the rate itself from the local authority. And there are so many anomalies in the current rate system, of which there is 15 different statutes. There is an ad hoc arrangement all over the country now as to how local authorities are dealing with rates. And there is, I think, a 75% collection of rate, showing you that there is a growing number of business people that simply cannot afford the rates that are being imposed on their properties. And it is shocking to think that the government refused to acknowledge or understand that in starting a business, when you're watching your costs, that the only single cost that you can't touch is a government cost in rates. So you show no sympathy or understanding to those that are starting a business or those that are in a business relative to the rates. And I'm suggesting a different approach. I'm suggesting, first of all, a value for money approach. You prove to me that the 1.4 billion collected in rates, or 28% collected by local authorities, is actually being used effectively and efficiently. You give me the rationale behind imposing a rate on a business without any consideration of the ability of that business to pay. There is no rationale there. You just force the issue with them. Insist on payment. Have the officers called to the building or the premises. Bring some sort of pressure to bear on those that are already under pressure because of taxes and everything else. Make it known in the local community that the business can pay. It is just appalling what is going on, and there is no real intent on the side of government to reform it. You look at the number of local shops, the local pubs all over the country that have closed down, and they will tell you that rates and the imposition of rates and the continuing increase in those rates, in spite of the fact that they've been held at one level over the last few years, is having a detrimental effect on their business. And if we're really serious about business, this is one single act that we could take that would show the entrepreneurs and business people that we are serious about understanding their problems. And for some reason, this reluctance within government persists. If you listen within your clinic to those that own creches, to take just one sector again, apart from the publicans, the small shops and all of those, the creches that are providing care to allow parents, both of them, to go out to work, will tell you that they can't afford to pay the rates. And they're now extending their services into what really is an educational establishment. Well, if it's an educational establishment in that respect, they shouldn't pay rates. So why can you not single out certain sectors and actually remove rates from them altogether where the case is made, or reduce the rates? Why can you not understand that the closure of a post office, the closure of a bank, and the closure of other government services in a local community not only impacts on the community, but actually reduces the footfall within that local street and makes it impossible for the business to perform? If you look at the high streets around the country, you will see shops closed. If you look at the rates bills around the country, you will see that there is a huge issue with the subsequent occupier clause. And that has to be removed. If you look at the issue in relation to sports clubs and how they are being considered for rate on the full property, you would clearly understand that there is an issue that needs to be dealt with. And yet, you will not put in place the immediate legislation to deal with that. We have had emergency legislation in this House to deal with lots of things. And the one single thing that we praise, entrepreneurs performing at home and doing very well, those that are performing at home and in the export market. And regardless of who you speak to or what category you're into, if you listen to the Chambers of Commerce of Ireland, they will tell you, the Small Firms Association and many of the other representative bodies and groups, priority for them is reconsider valuation of the rates structure. And then on the other side of it, you have the business that is anxious to get on, the business that wants to extend and create jobs. And what happens after you pay your charges in local authority, after you meet your charges that are attached to the planning application, all taxes, Minister, all taxes, you're then faced with a revaluation of your property. So the revaluation comes in and you end up paying significantly more in your rates just because you were an entrepreneur, you wanted to take the risk and create jobs, you wanted to get that loan to see could you perform beyond that and get profitable, and the one obstacle that you can't control that intervenes in your decision making, in your progress forward as an entrepreneur, is the local authority rates. Now, you might think that that's a small burden for a business to carry, but you ask any pub that does not have the income now that it used to have, how is it faring with its rates? Is it not incumbent on the government to look at that business and say, look, we see from your books, from your turnover, and we know from the economy generally that you simply don't have the money to pay, but you will not introduce a legislation to make that happen. And yet, I again go back to the argument about the creches. It's the same argument. The subsequent occupier clause has gone on for years. And then you come across the valuation office itself. And the valuation office will tell you, and they've told the Public Accounts Committee, they simply do not have what it takes to revalue the properties around the country in a speedy and efficient manner. And as a result of that, you're going to get pockets that have been revalued. And there are no winners in the revaluation process either, because the same amount of rates have to be taken in that process. So the ones that lose are the ones who have had a reasonable rate and you increase it. And there may be other businesses where there will be a slight reduction, but the rate take will be the same. That's not what this is about. It has to be about value for money, efficiency, and an acknowledgement that these people are making a contribution to the overall economy, which you do not recognise. The Taoiseach constantly says, this is the best country in the world, small country in the world to do business in. Well, I can tell you, Minister, because you seem to be ignoring all of the facts, I can tell you, as someone who has worked in the private sector, who continues to work in the private sector, that your government, with the upward-only rent reviews and the promise that you walked away from, and indeed the commercial rates, are hanging a noose around the necks of Irish businesses that you will regret, because we will lack generations after us that will come forward and be willing to be entrepreneurs. So all you have to do is put action around some of the narrative that you've put out there. Put action around it and start with the rates system. Start reducing this burden of rate on the various local authorities.
Deputies, 2 minutes remaining.
Now, I have suggested in this bill that we be flexible in terms of the rates. I've suggested the current system is impossible and hard to work. The legislation is too old. It's based on a notion for a different time, a time that has well gone. I've suggested in here that the laws that are so historic now, that they would all be looked at in an efficient and in a fast-track process that would give us an outcome. I've told you about the subsequent occupier clause, and I've told you about the various properties in terms of sport and so on. I've mentioned the bill that you can build on that has been through the House. And I'm suggesting to you that in relation to this and the Valuations Office, that there should be a self-assessment in this. You're so fond of that process, you should apply it here, where the valuation of the building can be taken locally, where the occupier and the entrepreneur apply the rate that is going, and that where, if it's a misleading piece of information, like anything else, you're subject to a penalty should you do something wrong. Now, that's the easiest and most cost-effective way to do it. And I'm suggesting to you that as a piece of reform, and you don't seem to be too fond of reform, but let's embrace this piece of reform, and let's do it immediately, because everyone in this House, on your side and on the opposition side, are keenly aware that they simply cannot compete. They cannot compete with the amount of taxes that they're dealing with and with the rate structure. And as people abroad who export and go on trade missions, as they win outside of this country the orders necessary to keep their business open, they will tell you as well the one single thing that annoys them is the rate. And you have to do something about it, and do it immediately.
Thank you very much, Deputy.
I want to address the Jekyll and Hyde approach that I've seen here this morning. So let me start by saying to Paddy Coffey, TD from Waterford, you were great, Deputy, once you left down the script. I have to say, it came from the heart, you knew what you were speaking about, and you moved away from the bull that was in your original opening statement. And I commend you for that. And I want to say to Deputy Donovan, I haven't heard you speak in the House, and you're a regular contributor, I know, but I admire you for what you said today. Because you are a member of the backbenches, you are a member of Fine Gael, and you're expected to toe the line. But you have given this morning your personal view, and you have acknowledged the reality of what's happening outside the gates of this House. And I admire you for that. And you're a young person in politics, and I hope that you keep up that contribution, because it's only by changing from within your own party that you will bring about the changes that are necessary in the legislation that comes from that side of the House. And I want to thank you for your contribution. And you're the only opposition member, or sorry, government member, that has spoken here today. I want to thank my colleagues in opposition, Michael Fitzmaurice, Marty McGrath, Sean Fleming, Brian Stanley, Charlie McConnell, yourself, Deputy Donovan, and you, Deputy Coffey. But I want to go back to your speech, because you didn't write that speech. That speech was handed to you as you came in that door. Because whoever wrote that speech has no idea of what's going on outside. And if you show to your brother the transcript of the last piece that you just spoke in this House, he would say, that's grand, Paddy. But if you show him that rubbish, he'll tell you where to put it. And that's the problem here. You know, and your brother knows, and Deputy Donovan knows, the big issues that are going on outside this House. You know that what you've just repeated and parroted from the civil service is a nonsense, an absolute nonsense. If you believe in it, Minister Coffey, or Deputy Coffey, whichever one we're speaking to now, take out an ad in your local paper. Take out an ad in your local paper. And if you don't want to pay for the full publication of this rubbish, that's your opening statement, then just pay for the following comments. That you're very familiar and generally accepting of the operation and practice of the rating system. Would that go down well in Waterford, do you think? I don't think so. You might then go on and say that the approach that I've adopted in parts of the bill, the liability in this case is unworkable. I don't think that would go down very well. If you go along then and say that, you know, 5% is the cost of rates to most businesses, 5% of their overall costs, I don't think that they would agree with that. If you go along and say that in the ad that you'll put out there about taxing through the rates the sporting clubs, I don't think they'll be too happy with you, Deputy Coffey. And if you go along and you say that the rates burden is not excessive in the overall, would you stand beside your local publican and say to him, or the local shopkeeper, your rates are not that excessive? I don't think you get much of a vote down there, Deputy Coffey. So as Minister, and I'll allow you 1 minute at the end of my time to stand up in this House and say, politically, I am accepting this bill on the basis that it can be amended at committee stage, or that individuals like Deputy Donovan can bring forward amendments and so on. Because I don't hold that my bill has all of the answers or is correct in every aspect of it. They're just my views. And I was honestly hoping that you would come in here today and accept the bill, because it can be amended later on. But we now live in a country that's at war with its citizens. I started by saying that. And the first duty of government and obligation is to keep their people safe. I keep on saying this in here. But what have you done? I'll tell you what you've done. You've created a system whereby any local business can now have visits from the revenue commissioners. They can have visits from the Department of Health. They can have visits from 6 other different government departments if you run a local deli down the road. And you can go on and say they can have visits from HICWA, from NERA. And then you have the revenue itself threatening individual citizens with the collection of all sorts of taxes. You have given the ability of those that administer this country to put their hands into the pockets of ordinary people and steal from them, take it from them. That's what you've asked, that's what you've done. And you've made everybody in the country that's in business or that owes money, you've almost criminalised them to the extent that they must prove that they're innocent. Everyone is looked upon as being guilty. And if you look at the entrepreneurs that are out there and the people that are trying to keep their businesses open and sustain jobs, you're treating them like criminals with what you're doing. And you're making it impossible from the point of view of administration for them to run their businesses. And then you have the rate system, which you say, in my bill, some of it is unworkable. And I don't like the language in the stuff that you dished out when you came in here first. Not your words, I would say, Deputy Coffey. Yes, the minister's words. Yes, the words from civil servants, saying that my bill would interfere with the running of the courts. Let me just tell you that that is absolute and utter nonsense. It would make it more streamlined, more efficient. In fact, it addresses issues that were raised by county managers recently. And yet you describe it as interfering. And I find that that type of language runs right through everything that we now do in this country. You talk about the Valuations Office, and I pointed out to you earlier on, the Valuations Office told us they'll never get around the country to revalue properties. It just won't happen. They're not able to do it. Now you're creating the inequitable situation out in the marketplace, where one set of creches will pay and the other set won't pay. You'll have the row with local authorities and local sporting clubs. And sporting clubs are now the only organisations respected in their communities that are delivering a service that is family orientated, that introduces discipline and gives young people something else to do in life, other than doing something that's not good for society. And you're going to begin to tax them through the rate system. Now, there is no sense in it. Go back to the word unworkable. I don't know whether both of you now in the House have constituency offices. I presume that you have. Do you pay your rates on your constituency offices? No, you don't. So it was fine to walk in here and exempt us from paying rates on our constituency offices, but you can't do anything to assist the SME sector that create 800,000 jobs in their time in this country. And you may not be able to do much through the rate system because you don't want to affect the 1.4 billion that you take from the rate system. But yet, you expect them, the local business people, just to ignore everything and pay up. And these same business people are paying €3 per cubic metre for water in, water out. And in their day, these rates were to include water in, water out. They were to include the refuse collection. They were to include everything else. And the people pay them. Now they pay for their bins. They pay for their water. And when that young entrepreneur or business person goes home, or the established family traditional outlet there in the high street goes home, they will now pay for water at home. But it's convenient for the government to exempt Irish water from rates. So, Paddy Coffey, can I offer you the opportunity to acknowledge your brother and the rest of people in business, and the knowledge that you know personally to be true, to stand up here as Minister and say, Deputy McGuinness, your bill will go through to the second stage and we'll have a fuller discussion on it. Come on, Paddy, up you get.
You have time? There's time, Deputy.